Ever feel like everything's getting more expensive? Groceries, rent, even breathing. And let's not forget car insurance. It just keeps creeping up. But here's the thing. Insurify makes one part of life easier. It's an insurance comparison site that finds real-time quotes from dozens of top insurers. Insurance companies compete for your business, driving down prices. It's like having a friend who knows all the best deals, but without the smug grin. You could save as much as $1,025 a year, and you might even cut your bill in half. The best part, it's all online. No phone calls, no spam, no nonsense. You can be covered in as little as 10 minutes, and with an excellent star rating on Trustpilot, saving feels less impossible. So why not give it a shot? Visit Insurify.com and see how much you can save. That's INSURIFY.com. Average potential savings based on initial quotes received by 183,234 customers seeking insurance through Insurify. Actual savings may vary depending on state of residence, individual circumstances, coverage selections, and insurance provider. Savings results are not guaranteed.
This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes was waiting to get your money back, which turned into worrying about getting your money back. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes today and help you get up to a $4,000 refund advance loan fast. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Refund advance has $0 loan fees and 0% APR. Refund advance loans may be issued by First Century Bank N.A. or Web Bank. Terms apply, subject to approval.
As you've probably heard by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code The Athletic. Make your first deposit of at least $10. Place your first bet on any game and claim your voucher for a 1-year subscription to The Athletic. See BetMGM.com for terms. U.S. promotional offers not available in D.C., Mississippi, New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona. 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts. 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa. 1-800-270-7117 for confidential help in Michigan. 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code The Athletic, and you'll get a 1-year subscription to The Athletic, plus up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and amid rumours of Verstappen heading to Aston Martin in 2026, will it really happen? That's one question we'll tackle among the many we couldn't answer in our recent live shows. I'm Ed Straw, and joining me to pick up where we left off in London and Birmingham are Scott Mitchell-Malm and Mark Hughes. Well, Mark, we've got 3/4 of our live show lineup back together for this podcast. What was that experience like of the 2 events we did earlier in the month?
They were great. Really enjoyed them. It's a very different experience just writing about stuff as, of course, what I'm used to, or even talking remote on a podcast like this. It can feel like you're writing or talking into the void sometimes. This gave you that instant connection and feedback, and it was great to meet and chat with our listeners afterwards too.
Yeah, so many enthusiastic fans. It's great to put some names to faces as well in terms of regular questioners from the Race Members Club. What did you make of it, Scott?
Yeah, really, really enjoyable. Super lovely to meet so many that hung around afterwards to chat to us. And really appreciate the support from everybody that attended. The atmosphere in the room on both nights was really great. And I really enjoyed just having like a slightly different vibe about it all, whether that was, the way that we were kind of talking with each other, the fact that we were able to do slightly different things to normal. I was really, really heartened by how many people came away from it feeling like expecting to sort of just have like paid to turn up and just be in a room while a podcast was recorded, but they really did feel like they got more of a show aspect as well and different things. Plus, obviously, we put a big emphasis on audience questions, some audience participation too, and everybody seemed to enjoy it. I was very pleased that everything we hoped would landed, and everybody seemed to get something out of it. So yeah, really nice. I really, really hope we can do more of those in the future.
Yeah, it's one of the things we really tried to do with it. It's not just a podcast being done, even though it's sort of marketed like that, but we try and do more. And there is some element of it that is, for those who weren't there, that is basically like the podcast, particularly in the first half where we talk through the season to come. So you'll get that, but we try and do other bits and pieces as well, which is greatly enjoyable. And it's a funny thing to do, particularly for you and me, Mark. Obviously, we started out writing for magazines, and now we're in a world where we're doing video, podcasts, live shows. It's I mean, Scott's a little bit younger, so he was a bit more trained for everything.
Well,
but
typewriters in my case,
exactly, chiseling it in on a bit of rock or papyrus, writing that kind of thing. It's amazing to do it, but it is great to get that instant feedback, and it's fun to actually be able to really see how people respond and find out what people want to talk to, even chatting with people after the show. Just some of the questions that were being asked, and just the enthusiasm was great, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. And and I would say that if anybody who was at the show or couldn't make it, or for some reason wasn't aware that it was on but would love to go to one in the future, if you are keen on this kind of thing being done and be more of a regular occurrence, put the pressure on. Send us messages on social, join the Race Members Club, send us messages on Patreon for where you'd like to see live shows being done, how often you'd like to see them. We can start ratcheting up the pressure on producer Johnny to put together more in the future.
Absolutely. We don't have anything specifically planned, but there's certainly an intent to do more as well. So we're looking forward to that. And thanks to everybody who came. Really, really great to have your support. We really appreciate it. And to those who didn't come, we enjoy your support as well. It's fantastic. The podcast, actually, we had our first episode just over 5 years ago. So, it's been both a long and amazingly brief journey, because it only seems like the other day that we released the first episode. Anyway, we had loads of questions to answer during that live show. We could only scratch the surface of the amount we were asked, unfortunately, on stage. So we thought it would be appropriate, as I think we promised on the second night in Birmingham, we would reconvene and answer more of the excellent questions on a recorded podcast. Sorry we won't be able to get to all of them still, but we do appreciate the quality and quantity of the questions, even if it does make it difficult to select them, because you want to answer all of them. Now, there will also be a special Members Club F1 Extra episode with Ben Anderson, who was the fourth member of the live show team. He'll tackle some more of your questions in the near future as well. That's exclusively for members of the Race Members Club. And remember, if you'd like to join the Race Members Club, which grants question-asking privileges throughout the season, ad-free listening, loads of bonus content in all sorts of forms, head to Patreon and search for The Race, or hit the link in the podcast episode description. So let's get into our questions now. Very obvious theme for the first part. Mark, the first question to you from Lewis. I presume not Lewis Hamilton, just another Lewis. How much weight do you put on the Max Verstappen to Aston Martin rumours and the $1 billion price tag?
You're not sure about the price tag, Lewis. It sounds like one of those made-up newspaper headlines where they sit around and decide how much it should be and then decide that's what it is. But
always a very round number, isn't it?
Yes, it's conveniently so.
It's very precise.
Yes. In the old days, you used to sometimes have Fleet Street come round and after there'd been a crash or something like that, saying, how fast do you think that accident would happen at? And you'd say, 130, yeah, about 160. I thought so.
Always round up. But not to any figure that actually makes sense to anybody who understands the mathematics of rounding up.
Yes. But come back to Lewis's question. The idea of Max to Aston, I think, is very real. And if what we're hearing on the grapevine is true, those negotiations are already ongoing. So even before we started hearing these rumours from within the paddock and not just from people speculating on it on the outside, it did make perfect sense. Max has been at Red Bull for a decade. It's a new formula, new engine partner. Adrian Newey's gone. Max has won multiple titles and has already said only the first one really matters to him. The rest have just been a nice indulgence. So he's clearly ready for a new challenge at just the time that Lance Stroll has brought this incredible array of talents and facilities together and has taken Honda, with whom Verstappen has a great relationship already, with them. It's the obvious next step for both parties, I'd say. So yes, I'd put quite a lot of weight behind the rumours. Yeah,
we're presuming it's not done, but I'm sure there'll have been some contact and there's an intent, certainly on Aston Martin's side. Any team would intend to get Max Verstappen if they could. And we know that Verstappen's looking around, and as you say, the timing means it could well line up for 2026. That's going to be a continued rumour that will churn around for until Verstappen really decides what his future is, even though, of course, he's got that 2028 Red Bull contract that's looking increasingly likely he won't see that one out. Right, Scott, a related question about Aston Martin from Jake. Do you think that Adrian Newey and or Andy Cowell may have decision-making power over both driver seats at Aston Martin?
I don't want to make too much of a leap from Jake's question, but based on the number of submissions that I remember we got on the night, both in London and Birmingham, there were a huge number of Lance Stroll future-related questions and how he fits into that. So I'm going to do
it's without shadow of doubt the most common listener question we get is about what Lance Stroll's doing.
Yeah,
that car. We get them for every time we asked it, and understandably so.
Yeah. So I think from this, I would, and Jake can write in and correct if I'm incorrectly inferring, but it's obviously related to, will they want to replace Lance? Because I can't imagine either thinking that Fernando Alonso is in urgent need of upgrading. If regardless of whether that was Jake's intent with the question, I think simply I would be surprised if Newey's gone there without some kind of influence. He's gone in there first of all on a proper partner level. He's not just there as a senior technical person. He's managing technical partner, isn't he? Who have a shareholding in the team, so that he's got skin in the game. And he doesn't. Newey's not the kind of person that will abide any kind of obvious weakness or limitation, and I think Cowell's probably the same. Obviously Cowell's there in a slightly different capacity, but theoretically both of them are senior enough to definitely have a say and input into the driver decision. But ultimately it will come down to what is so widely assumed to be, all the while that Lawrence Stroll is there in his chairman and co-owner position, then his son Lance is safe in one of the seats. Whether or not that's ring-fenced, I don't think that can be ring-fenced indefinitely, because ultimately Lawrence has other shareholders to satisfy. He has ambitions he wants to achieve with the team. I know he has ambitions that he wants his son to achieve, and he wants to achieve them with his son, but ultimately reality will have a factor. That right now Lance isn't the main limitation on what Aston Martin can achieve. But if everything comes together the way they want for 26 and 27, then the driver pairing will become a limitation at some point, and people like Newey and Cowell operate too practically to ignore that. So if they don't have that decision-making power, then you would imagine that there's a collision course that both sides within the leadership are on.
And of course, remember when Adrian Newey left Williams, one of the reasons was he had in his contract that he had to be consulted on drivers, and he wasn't when they chose to get rid of Damon Hill, basically, and sign Heinz-Harald Frentzen. And he was irritated about the decision that was made on Villeneuve as well, and not being fully involved. So there's some history there. Right, a question from Ashok Clowder. A lot has been said about Aston Martin having the most cutting-edge facility of all the teams, but how does Ferrari's factory stack up against theirs? Very, very different in terms of the ambience. Obviously, the Aston Martin factory is in a field opposite Silverstone. It's more than a field now. They've landscaped. It's a very, very nice location. Really beautiful factory, and they've got their pond and the wildlife area and all that kind of thing. So they've tried to make it quite nice. Inside, obviously, it's conceived to be the perfect modern F1 team factory. Ferrari, opposite end of the spectrum in terms of age. It's grown up organically. Obviously, taken over Maranello. It's completely unique in terms of the style of the factory. Anyone who's seen photos will probably get a feel for that. But ultimately, inside, they've spent a huge amount of money over the years, and the facilities are excellent at Ferrari. The only real limitation is it's just not quite as elegantly laid out because of the way it's grown, and they haven't sort of been able to restart and build everything from scratch. But it's all sort of there. It's spread out a tiny bit more. But Ferrari's facilities are very, very good. And I don't think they're lacking anything in that regard. I guess the question is whether what Aston Martin make a big virtue of, which is the fact that the factory is designed to be a smart factory for the cost cap era where you've got to keep track of absolutely everything to the nth degree to squeeze every penny out of everything. The question is whether they've got a bit of an advantage on that compared to Ferrari. But very, very different ways of going about it, very different histories. But I don't think Aston Martin's facility is far and away better than anyone else's or anything, but it's certainly not giving anything away and may have some advantages in the way it's been conceived. So Yeah, very much. Ferrari looks old from the outside, but very cutting edge once you get inside some of the buildings. Right, the next question for you, Mark, from Paul Ramsdale. What scenario will it take for us not to see Lance Stroll, a future world champion obviously, on the grid in seasons to come? Subsequently, do you see Lawrence Stroll being involved in F1 beyond his son's racing career, an ultimate F1 World Championship crowning?
It's a good question, Paul. And I think, as Scott was talking about before, a very important point is that when he's not the main reason that the team isn't running at the front, there's not that really great impetus to replace them. But if you get to the stage where they have obviously a title caliber operation, and one half of that is misfiring, then that becomes very much the spotlight goes on them, and the pressure would be more. And I think ultimately it will come down to Lance himself in that situation, arriving at a point where he sees there's a difference between himself and an Alonso or a Verstappen, and asking himself if he has the desire, that really deep desire, needed to bridge that gap. It's he's got a nice life racing his F1 car at the moment, but how long before just repeating at this level where it's thin, and how long before he starts feeling the pressure of a team that's becoming ever more competitive, if he hasn't already. So his dad's obviously very ambitious for him, one step removed, and that ambition is what has brought Lawrence into this project in the first place. But now that he's in, I think ambition burns so deep in Lawrence, regardless of how Lance is doing. I think Lawrence will succeed no matter what it takes. That's his attitude, and by the evidence we've seen since he arrived, you believe him, or I believe him anyway. And I think if one day Lance came to him and said, "Dad, I'd prefer to stop, or I'd prefer to get involved in winning Le Mans or whatever," Lawrence would just have to accept that. But I don't believe for one moment it would deter him from achieving what he wants to achieve with the team. And they'd simply replace Lance with another driver alongside their superstar and continue the quest.
I think he's in too deep now with what they've invested in Aston Martin, and the way that Lawrence will probably look at it in terms of the investment, the kind of bullishness, the ambitions that he set out a long time ago. I think, I can't remember exactly how he's on record in terms of saying this, but like Lawrence sees himself as a winner, someone that has succeeded in everything that he's built and taken on. And while it's not impossible that he could spin it as, I have now set up what will go on to become the greatest F1 team ever, and claim that as a victory, like that's possible, I don't think he'll do it. He'll want to see it over the line and actually get that championship and be there when it all theoretically comes together. And I suspect that will last longer than having Lance around. But obviously you can't rule out the prospect that was slightly jokingly referenced in the way that question was framed, that Lance does step up when or if that car becomes available.
Well, that's what I think they're hanging on to. And that's why I suspect the reckoning on that side of things will come when Aston Martin does fulfill its potential and start regularly winning races and challenging for championships. That's when either Lance Stroll needs to step up, as those in the team say he's going to, or I suspect more likely they realise that the ultimate potential combined with his overall approach won't coalesce into being more than a decent Grand Prix driver, because in that scenario you need to be a fantastically good one. Scott, a question from Daniel. Aston Martin and McLaren are the only two teams retaining their 2024 driver lineup. How much of an advantage is this for those teams?
It's a small but not insignificant advantage in certain areas. So with McLaren, for example, I would say that in what will likely be or should be a tight battle at the front in the early races of the year in particular, that could be a lovely advantage for McLaren, because there shouldn't be anything that either of its drivers are leaving on the table now. Whereas at Ferrari, for example, Lewis Hamilton still needs to acclimatise there. Kimi Antonelli is getting up to speed at Mercedes. It should take some time for him to start to refine some of those rough edges. And at Red Bull, you've obviously got the unknown with Liam Lawson. So in terms of being a two-car operation, that's where it theoretically confers an advantage, especially as it is the last year of rule stability. So Piastri and Norris should be right at the limit of whatever car McLaren puts on track for them. For other teams, for example, like Aston Martin versus his midfield rivals, it's a bit more dependent on how much the driver changes elsewhere elevate others. Because if, for example, Aston Martin ends up with a similar car to Williams, I see no reason to believe that Aston Martin will beat Williams this year, because I think Carlos Sainz coming in, we know how good he is at adapting and how much of a hard worker he is. Joining forces with Alex Albon, that's a superior driver lineup in my mind to Aston Martin's, even though there's continuity there. Whereas when there are changes at teams like, let's say Alpine, for example, with Jack Doohan coming in and there being a question mark over exactly how long he's going to last, there's enough instability and uncertainty there, plus potentially more of a ceiling on what that new driver can achieve, where Aston's continuity can be more of an advantage. So it's circumstance specific, but theoretically, yes, it gives them an edge in specific battles.
And the final question for this part comes from James Mulsher. Can Kimi Antonelli break Max Verstappen's youngest race winner record? Well, he can, because he's young enough, but he's only young enough for the first 3 races, Australia, Bahrain, China. So can he? Yes. Will he? I'd be very surprised. Maybe if the Mercedes is the dominant car early on, he could do it, but it'd be pretty extraordinary if he's able to pick up a win in the first 3. Not impossible, though.
Shop now at the Home Depot and get up to 35% off select appliances. Plus, save up to an extra $400 on select appliances like Frigidaire. From the stainless steel French door refrigerator with crisp steel drawers to keep produce fresh longer, to the 5-burner electric range that lets you cook more at once and get meals on the table faster. Right now, get up to 35% off select appliances like Frigidaire. The Home Depot. How doers get more done. Pricing valid January 9th through January 29th. U.S. only. See store online for details and minimum purchase required.
Hi, it's Alexa Wybel from New York Times Cooking. We've got tons of easy weeknight recipes, and I'm going to make 2 of my favorites for you today. For my 5-ingredient creamy miso pasta, you just take your starchy pasta water, whisk it together with a little bit of miso and butter until it's creamy. Add your noodles and a little bit of cheese. It's like a grown-up box of mac and cheese. An easy weeknight recipe that feels like a restaurant-quality dish. Next up, I'm making my vegetarian mushroom shawarma pitas. This recipe is just built for efficiency. You toss your mushrooms and red onion in your spices, throw them in the oven. By the time they're done, your sauce is ready, you've chopped your cabbage, and you're ready to assemble. It feels crazy that something that tastes this complex and looks this colorful and beautiful is actually really easy to make and takes just 20 minutes of active time. It's just delicious. New York Times Cooking has you covered with easy dishes for busy weeknights. Find these recipes and more at nytcooking.com. It smells so good.
Okay, let's move on to another batch of questions now. Mark, you weren't on our Lewis Hamilton's first day at Ferrari podcast, so a question from Ewan for you about that move. How will Lewis Hamilton deal with Ferrari politics and the Italian media?
I think the politics won't be as bad as in the past. I think Freddie Vasseur's done a good job of calming all that down in his time there. He's really focused on the communications and relationships. There's no time for all the usual intrigue, which can be so destructive. He's very aware of it. He's more empowered as someone coming in from the outside than previous bosses. And he's on top of it. I think it'll always be there under the surface, but a big part of his role is keeping it there. And he seems to be doing a very good job of that. He's always got a good relationship with his drivers. He always talks very extensively with his drivers. He's a good guy to have as a team boss. He's not an autocrat. He's someone that the drivers can relate to. So that will help with Lewis's early days, I think, a lot. The Italian media places immense pressure on Ferrari drivers if they're not doing well. But if he's doing well, I don't think the intense scrutiny of just being a Ferrari driver will feel very different to the intense scrutiny he's felt throughout his career, which is more than any other driver. If any driver's ever been ready for this level of spotlight, it's Lewis. But if things don't go well, he'll keep his head down and not say much and focus on bouncing back and proving the doubt is wrong. And that's always been a powerful part of his motivation. He does feel criticism, I think, but he uses it as fuel sometimes. So if he's not doing well, he will get waves and waves of that criticism. Yeah, for sure.
Next up, a question for you, Scott, which you're the perfect person to answer given what happened in the live show from Joshua. Did Red Bull's own internal politics stop them from signing Carlos Sainz? Was not signing him a mistake?
Short answer is yes to both. Slightly longer answer is that I think there's a little bit of a division between, for example, Christian Horner and Helmut Marko on Sainz. I feel like that does come down, there's a significant amount of it comes down to Sainz when he was obviously at Toro Rosso with Max Verstappen, a little bit about the drivers and the way that they went about things because they were trying to establish themselves at the very start of their F1 careers because they were rookies together, but also their respective camps as well and the intensity of them and the way that they believe things should be done for the drivers, which is probably understandable in a similar vein to how we discuss what Lawrence wants to achieve with Lance Stroll. Anyway, you've got that underlying risk and issue and feeling that it wouldn't have been a very good idea. Every now and again you hear suggestions that Max was against it or the Verstappen camp were against it. I don't know what the reality is there. I don't think Max specifically was against it because I don't think he cares. I wouldn't like to try and put myself in Jos Verstappen's head and work out what really he wants from something like that. But there is also just that Horner-Marko element of, I feel like Horner kind of wants to manage stuff as seamlessly as possible, but there was definitely a point early in last year when a lot of the stuff was kicking off between the internal politics between him and Marko, the Thai side and the Austrian side and everything, where it felt like Horner was quite keen to call the Verstappen camp's bluff about what where the real hierarchy was, where the real power was. And I feel like Horner would have been a bit more open to bringing Sainz in, whereas Marko may be more against it because he's often, putting the Verstappen camp at ease. Plus, I always got the impression Marko never quite let go of the fact that Sainz willfully wanted out of the Red Bull program. Maybe that paints Marko in an unfairly petty light, but sometimes that stuff can run quite deep. As to whether it was a mistake, we'll see whether or not Lawson flies this year or not. But I just think in terms of what they needed and what ultimately gave them the strongest driver lineup, Sainz was the best free agent on the market by quite a way, I think, for 2025. And they didn't just overlook him, they pretty much dispelled him from contention early. So yeah, I do think that was a mistake.
Next up, a question from Dougal that I'll take. Will there be any push/pull rod suspension alterations in 2025? Well, in terms of dealing with what we know that Haas are retaining the 2024 Ferrari front suspension configuration. They'll take the 2025 gearbox and rear suspension from Ferrari because they've got access to 2025 stuff, but for the first time they're going to stick with the year old for the fronts. Now, Ayo Komatsu, the team principal's confirmed that. He didn't talk about what the Ferrari 2025 specification is. He's too sensible and to give that away, but it's widely expected they will go to a pull rod configuration at the front. They're currently on a push rod configuration. Now, that change will be made for aerodynamic reasons primarily, so we're expecting that. I don't think we'll see too much change because in an ideal world, what you'd want to do is not change as much as you possibly can while still gaining performance. But when you're trying to squeeze every last little fraction of performance out of the car, then a few teams may have been tempted to make further tweaks to what they're doing. But I'd be surprised if we see too much of a difference in terms of who's going pull rod, push rod, front and rear. But there is scope for other teams having made tweaks because still that's kind of a trend, but everyone's still a little bit all over the map when it comes to those choices. Mark, a question from Sebastian. Lewis Hamilton in a Ferrari in 2024 would have been in the title race with Ferrari winning the Constructors' Championship. Discuss.
Maybe. I'm not convinced. Leclerc's arguably the fastest guy out there. Sainz was particularly closely matched to him last year. Ferrari season was spoilt by that 6-race sequence between Spain and Monza where they did reduce the bouncing into the car with their upgrades. And having Lewis there wouldn't have prevented that. It's possible that Lewis would have got on with the Ferrari better than he did with the 24 Mercedes, but verdict's still out on that. I think even if we could guarantee that it was vintage Lewis in the car, peak Lewis, with Leclerc in the other car, I'm not sure that Ferrari is quite consistently quick enough through the year to beat McLaren to the Constructors' Championship. So, an unconvinced maybe on that one, Sebastian.
But maybe Lewis would have had a fully functioning appendix early in the year and therefore would have got a better result than stand-in Ollie Behrman managed in the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix, and that would have made all the difference with the missing points.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, and it's such a small amount of points in the Constructors, but challenging for the drivers would have been a little bit more difficult, I suspect. Scott, a question from Levi. Do you think Andrea Stella would have had the same impact on Alpine as he's had at McLaren?
I don't think so, because I don't think that the setup there would have been the same. I don't think he'd have had the consistency of support, especially if you look at the way things have changed at Alpine and the extent of the change over the last couple of years. It really, it slightly depends on sort of which version of Alpine you're putting him into. What's the setup? Who's the CEO? What's the structure? Because I can't give you the same answer 3 years in a row, because the structure is completely different there. So no, I think the way that Stella's been, backed at McLaren by Zach Brown, who takes on a lot of specific things, more on sort of like the marketing and communications side and that sort of stuff, and leaves Andrea to run the organisation and then empower the race team to be as strong as possible, and also influence the technical organisation the way that he has. I just don't see that being replicated at Alpine. It is all down to a lot of the details of the hypothetical. For example, are we saying that Stella's been at Alpine for as long as he'd have been at McLaren before getting the team principal role? Because I do think that's a big part of why Stella worked as a team principal early on. He was so, and remains and still is, so well respected within McLaren, and didn't rise through the ranks as such, because obviously he was a very established and successful engineer and senior figure within Ferrari before then. But, he didn't go into McLaren as deputy team principal or anything like that and then just get promoted when Andrea Seidel left. He went in on an engineering level and assumed more responsibility, and every time he did, he basically nailed it. So he just became the ideal candidate who had both the respect of the team at Woking, but also the team trackside, and had clear ideas of how to improve things. So I just think he ended up being a great fit, and a better one than we thought even that he would be at the time when he was appointed.
Next up, a question I'll take from Ewan. In a 4-team World Championship battle, will Red Bull being a one-driver team help them win the title? I would suspect not. Certainly won't help them in the Constructors' Championship, and I think it's a weakness in the Drivers' Championship. In this scenario, we're talking about a 4-team World Championship battle. So in that scenario, you'll have, let's say Red Bull wins a race one week, then Ferrari the next week. If, let's just say for the sake of argument, McLaren, when they win, it's a Norris first, Piastri second, and then Verstappen third. If you've then got on a weekend when Red Bull has the mild edge and it's Verstappen, but the second driver, you can park a Norris in between, let's say, then mathematically there's an advantage. I actually think lead drivers do like an easy number two because it makes life a bit more straightforward. But that only really works when you've got one car that's got a good advantage. When you've got 4 cars in the mix, that can really, really cost you. And Verstappen versus Perez last year is a good example of that, because Verstappen, had Perez been getting the same results that Verstappen was capable of, particularly in that spell after the early races when Red Bull was struggling a bit more and Verstappen was pulling rabbits out of the hats with wins. If he'd had Perez there with him, he'd have taken more points off Norris, and Norris would have been even further away in the championship fights. So I don't think it's a help. It's certainly a hindrance in the Constructors, and I'd argue it doesn't help you in the Drivers' Championship, even though you don't have your teammate taking points off you. But I'd always rather have the strongest driver lineup possible, personally. Mark, a question next up from John. Given that Red Bull have been at the vanguard of exploiting aero elasticity for the past 15 years, is it possible the steps made by McLaren and Mercedes in 2024 with their front wing designs was merely bringing these teams to the level Red Bull had already achieved?
And I think they could see quite clearly from both the camera footage and the flap angle that McLaren and Mercedes were able to run that they'd achieved something beyond what Red Bull was doing. And in previous seasons, when Red Bull was limited by the FIA in what it was doing with aeroelasticity, their understanding from the FIA was that such a level that McLaren was achieving would be clamped down upon. So when it wasn't, Red Bull campaigned for it to be. So I'm pretty sure Red Bull know exactly how to do it, but were just fearful of doing it. And by the time they saw from Miami onwards what McLaren had done, we're looking at a big cost in matching, which, as they run perilously close to the cost cap anyway, made trying to get it banned rather than chasing it the logical response.
There was definitely an ill feeling within Red Bull at times last year that they had been clamped down on with Flexi-wings and stuff in the past, and then were feeling like others were being given effectively a leg up by being allowed to get away with stuff that Red Bull would never be able to get away with if they took it that far. And yeah, there's a limitation to to how you can respond to that in season. So we should probably get Gary Anderson to pay close attention to how much the Red Bull wings are bending in Bahrain testing this year.
Next up, a question for Scott from Paul. Does Oscar Piastri risk losing his the next big thing status if he can't beat or at least match Norris this year? And on a related note, Kurt asks if we see Piastri as a genuine threat for the title, and is there a pathway with the guidance of Mark Webber to be the heir apparent to Verstappen at Red Bull?
On the first question from Paul, yes, he does, because it's his third season, so he can't be the next big thing once he's had a third season in a car that is fighting more at the front, as it was towards the end of Piastri's rookie season in F1. Plus, he's had enough time now he should still not be quite as refined as someone like Norris, who has a lot more experience than him, but a lot of those imperfections or limitations or weaknesses, whatever you want to call them, need to be ironed out in year 3. Plus, with the arrival of drivers like Kimi Antonelli and Ollie Behrman, for example, Liam Lawson's in a Red Bull, Isaac Hadjar in a Racing Bull, Gabriel Bortoleto at Sauber, Doohan in the Alpine, or maybe Colapinto in the Alpine if that gets changed. There are so many rookies coming into Formula 1, there's a real changing of the guard, that there will be more hype on another driver that ends up really, really shining, and that'll only be exaggerated if Piastri struggles alongside Norris, which sort of leads me into answering Kurt's question. He's only a genuine threat for the title if his qualifying form improves. I do think that there's something about Piastri on race day. I saw it in Formula 3, and you could see it at times in Formula 2, although his qualifying form was better there. He's really, really sharp in races. His race management can be very, very good. He's had to learn the hard way about perfecting time management in F1, and that improved again in 24, but needs to take another little step in 25. But also like his racecraft and sort of his decision making and his decisiveness and his robustness under pressure, all of those things are kind of there, but he just needs to, I think I might have said this on a podcast previously, so apologies if I'm repeating myself, but he needs to give himself better track position, because if he can do that, I would back him to convert those opportunities more often than not. And simply by doing that with a car capable of fighting for wins regularly, that will put him in championship contention. Beyond that is whether he displaces Norris at McLaren, or, as the question alludes, whether he then becomes a great target for Red Bull in a world where McLaren's still standing resolutely by Norris, and the likes of Webber think, I need to get Piastri somewhere else because there's a great opportunity for him to be the number one and the big focal point in a big team somewhere else.
Now a question from Nicola that I'll take. What's going on with Red Bull's driver academy? Why can they not produce drivers that they are happy to put in their F1 cars? Well, I think the short answer on that is it's going through a process of modernisation. The Red Bull driver academy has been, I think you could say, brutal but effective. There are a lot of drivers, not just who've made it to F1 because of them, but there are a lot of drivers with professional racing careers today who've had associations with Red Bull. So it's been successful, and it has brought through the Vettels, the Ricardos, and obviously Max Verstappen, although Verstappen obviously came on board very, very late. So I think what they're going through now is a bit of a process of modernisation, and there's two reasons for that. One, the world changes, the science changes, and two, there's so much competition now. Everyone's got their driver academies. People are scouting rigorously at karting level to try and get the next big thing. So you can't just rely on stumbling upon someone who catches your eye and you like the look of, which is the more old school way of doing it. And that's very much being driven now by Guillaume Rocard, who was former Sebastian Vettel race engineer with Red Bull. He's head of the driver academy now. So he's playing an increasingly active role in driving that and bringing it up to date. So I think it's been overtaken a little bit in recent years, and there's been quite a lot of chaos over the past 5-6 seasons. They are now trying to get things a bit under control, but it takes a little bit of a while, because obviously if you make changes when you're signing drivers, potentially when they're under 10 years of age, it takes a while for them to come through. So there's certainly an intent to do that. Obviously Helmut Marko has driven that and been quite effective in his own way in the past, but I think it's kind of moving on into a slightly different world. I think almost Marco's way of doing things doesn't entirely chime with things culturally now, and in terms of the rigour you need to apply. So let's see over the next 4 or 5 years how that settles down. Mark, a question from Mario Andrade. Is it realistic to expect Lewis Hamilton to perform at his highest level in a new car after so many years driving Mercedes-engined cars. You'll notice, Mark, I keep throwing you Hamilton questions because me and Scott have already talked about him, so you keep chiming in with Hamilton answers.
Sure. I don't think the engine is ever anything a top driver would struggle to adapt to, Mario. I think a few laps maximum before it's all second nature, and the differences aren't big between the power units. So, no, the adaptation will be all about handling traits, how it responds to setup changes, understanding it from a dynamics point of view, how it needs to be driven to maximize tyre life, but still keeping up a good pace, how you use the tools, those sort of things. They'll be what he has to adapt to. But power unit, no, it's not a big thing. It's the traits of the engines are all very similar anyway.
Would your answer have been different if Hamilton was making the change in the middle of 2014 and switching from the Mercedes to that year's Ferrari?
Yes, absolutely. But as I say, there are tiny differences now.
Well, on to the final part of our questions now. Mark, a question from Stephen Parkinson. How should Yuki Tsunoda feel after Red Bull opted for Liam Lawson? Reflective that he must improve? Or is he perhaps right to be frustrated, given his experience level?
I think he's probably just feeling, what more can I do? And so he just has to use that and sort of go in on himself and pull out yet more and let the performance take care of everything else, and hope that either within the Red Bull family it's recognised, or that someone outside sees him as someone that could be useful for them. He can't be discouraged by it, and just has to sort of, as I say, turn it into an energy for himself.
Next up, Scott, a question for you from Alex. If you were managing Gabriel Bortoleto, would you have encouraged him to accept the Sauber seat?
I actually thought about this quite a lot at the end of last year when Bortoleto was in contention for that drive, and we knew it was coming down to the choice between another experienced driver or a rookie, and Bortoleto had got to the front of the queue. And I thought at the time, and I still think now, it's enough of a question mark to make me seriously ponder it. And I think the answer is basically yes, you would encourage him to accept it, but on the right terms. Primarily because when opportunities to definitely step into Formula One and actually have that seat are rare, even when there's been so much turnover in such a chaotic driver market as last year. Yes, he had great currency as the F3 champion, and then obviously soon after he actually did the Sauber deal, became Formula 2 champion as well. But we've seen too many F2 champions in recent years not step up into F1. It's a guarantee of nothing, and you don't know whether or not you'll be able to do enough on the sidelines to stay relevant, to stay interesting. There'll be another F2 champion for starters 12 months down the line. He'll have as much cachet as you. You'll have other drivers in Formula 1 who strengthen their case. We saw from 23 into 24 unprecedented stability from the end of one season to the start of next. So sometimes teams don't want to make any changes. Plus, there are big rule changes for 26. A lot of teams were kind of keen to have their drivers set and continue through the 25 into 26 season. So if there were any changes, you did your adapting in 25, and then you were ready to nail the start of the new rules in 26. So there would have just been too much uncertainty. You'd have had to have extreme confidence in another offer materialising to say no. But I would have done it knowing that there was a risk attached. So therefore you want as strong a guarantee as possible in terms of duration of the deal, with an opportunity for a big payoff if they want to change their mind. You just have to make sure that you're ring-fenced as much as possible. I just don't think you can say no when a seat is on the table.
And now Raj P asks, what qualifies as a success for Audi in the long term? Mercedes-style dominance, or just good participation in an attempt to sell more road cars? Well, it's Audi, isn't it? Volkswagen Group's the second biggest car manufacturer in the world, I think, by volume of sales. Just being there and doing okay is not good enough, is it? They've got to fight at the front and win championships. That's the only thing that's acceptable. Mercedes-style dominance, okay, you don't have certainly that sort of 7-8 year spell. That's unprecedented in F1 history, so they don't quite need to do that. But they've got to be winning. There's no point in coming in just to be good. They're not a plucky underdog. They're whatever you'd call an overdog, aren't they? It's Volkswagen Group. They've got to succeed, haven't they?
Just a dog, aren't they?
Them just turn? well, that's the problem. That's where they are at the moment. It's going to take them time, but they've got to, in 4 or 5 years, be winning races and fighting for championships, winning championships. Surely, anybody going to let them off?
No.
Excellent. There's your target there. Audi. So it's either do that or sell out to Qatar entirely, I suspect. Right, Mark, a question from Shez. If Ferrari adopts the Mercedes Red Bull front wing philosophy, does that hurt Lewis and maybe Charles Leclerc like it did in 2024?
Oh, you mean if Ferrari do the flexi front wing? Because Mercedes did that, they introduced it on Lewis's car in Canada. It's definitely a hazard, yes. It will make the car quicker if it's done right, but it might require Lewis to evolve his natural style, which, as we've talked about before, is all about getting all the load on the car under braking and making that very quick transition from hard braking to quick rotation early in the corner. And that's something which is more difficult to do with these low-rate cars, with the how low they run to the ground to maximise ground effect. And yes, it is something that Lewis struggled with last year when they introduced it on the Mercedes. Yes, the car became quicker, the car became more competitive, so that was good in one sense. The Lewis's deficit to the front reduced, but at the same time it did stretch the gap between Russell and Lewis when they made that change. So yeah, it is something that he may find and that he will have to work on to just evolve his natural style, adapt to it. You can't just keep hoping that indefinitely that the cars will come to your preferred style of driving. You just at some point will have to reprogram that muscle memory if it proves to be a problem.
One for you now, Scott, from Louis. Do you think any of the rookies will get the better of their teammates this year? 5 rookies to choose from.
Yeah, because you continue to reject Liam Lawson as a rookie. Not
on
in
the pure basis that he's not a rookie.
Yeah, I'm not criticising it. He's a full season rookie. I will give him that at best. But I agree, it's really these 5. I would say that 2 do. Ollie Behrman and Gabriel Bortoleto, I think, have the best chance. I think Behrman showed last year with how he stepped in and performed alongside Nico Hülkenberg in particular in Azerbaijan and Brazil when he had his Haas outings, that it is possible for him to step into that environment and be quicker than an established, experienced teammate. So I think him versus Esteban Ocon is one that could go Behrman's way. And I would say, given what Behrman showed at Haas, I think Bortoleto should be aiming to do the same against Hülkenberg at Sauber, especially as they're both new to the team. I know that Hülkenberg's going back, but new in terms of recent history. So there's a great opportunity there. If he's as good as he has looked at times in F3 and F2 while winning those championships, and he's as good as Fernando Alonso, who Bortoleto is part of that management stable, says he is, then there's no reason why he shouldn't. Antonelli, Doohan and Hadjar, I think the quality of their teammates and where they're at within those race teams, Russell at Mercedes, Gasly at Alpine, Tsunoda at Racing Bulls, I think those 3 are drivers who will enhance their reputations by being really close to those teammates, but I'd be surprised if they get the better of them over the course of the whole season.
Next up, a question from Lawrence. Are we really expecting an increased spread in performance across the field with the 2026 regulations, considering all the teams are working with the cost cap and wind tunnel/CFD restrictions? Yeah, it's true. There's a narrower band in terms of the resources. However, historically, the performance spread always increases. And that's primarily because the earlier you are in your design and development process, the more progress you can make. So let's say a team doing a good development job can gain, for the sake of arguments, let's say you can gain 2/10 with a month of wind tunnel running. Well, if you do that well and you gain your 2/10, another team will gain, say, 1/10 in the same time if they're not as effective. And because the rate of gain is higher earlier on, the differences are just by nature become bigger, whereas right now, when things are close, it's really, really tiny little gains that are being made in a similar period of time. And of course, you've got to double that effect as well, because it's not just the cars that are different, it's the power units as well. So while the power units now, there's a little bit of difference, and obviously Renault complained about their disadvantage, but it's not cavernous or anything. So both the cars and the engine performance should be a bigger spread. So just by nature in history and those factors, you will see, I suspect, an increased spread of performance. Of course, nothing's guaranteed. It could be tighter, but even with prescriptive rules and the resources as they are, I think it will be a bigger spread at the start of 26 than it was at the end of 2025. Mark, a question from Gwion. The number of F1 races in a season has increased dramatically in recent years. Has that helped to grow the sport, or has it devalued individual races and made them less special? Does an individual Grand Prix have less meaning now as part of a longer season?
I think that's something which can only be answered by you guys, the fans. It's taken the sport into new territories. It's given it a following in places it didn't have before. Look at China as a great example. So it's grown it commercially too. 24 multi-million-dollar hosting fees, netting a lot more than 16 or 17. But does that make it, the currency devalued? Is it the F1's currency devalued by it? And I guess that's in the eye of the beholder, which in this case is you, Guion.
Next up, Scott, a question for you from James Tucker. Would you prefer 6 drivers going for the championship or a straight duel like all the classics?
That is a very, very good question. I mean, gut feeling is that I'd just like to see that many drivers in the mix and it being almost chaotic in a sense. But thinking about it a little bit more, the only risk you run with that is it just being a little bit kind of hard, not harder to follow, but just a little bit kind of less valuable as a narrative through the season because it's just going to be so volatile. And could that potentially be a bad thing? Whereas when you have that straight fight, I mean, I don't really want to relive 2021 in its entirety, but that was fascinating charting that over the course of the whole season. My gut feeling is that more would be more, but I might throw that to the two of you. Like looking back to say like the first half of 2012, for example, does it become too random, or is it interesting when you have that situation where there are multiple drivers in the mix and you don't know which way the fight's going to emerge?
Yeah, when it's multiple teams, it seems to you don't go in, excited by the next installment of the duel, and it's more just what's going to happen this weekend. It's more like I think I prefer a duel, but they've each got their appeal. And
of course, there are classics that aren't pure duels, like 86. We've just talked about that on Bring Back V10s and Adelaide 86, and that was 3 drivers, 4 really, because Senna for Lotus was sort of in the championship fight and only dropped out a little bit before the end. So, as long as it's live, that's the main thing for me, I think. You want it to go to the end.
Yeah, I think my final adjudication on it will be that a duel is very, very good, but it has to be different teams because it's still good if it Hamilton Rosberg got very entertaining at times, but I'll always prefer one driver from one team against one driver from the other. So I'll accept multiple teams, but a 2 or 3 driver fight I think is more than enough for me.
Next up, a question from Callum Ryan. Who will finish 9th in the Drivers and 5th in the Constructors' Championship in 2025?
Great question.
What a thing to predict. I am going to go with Pierre Gasly to be 9th in the Drivers' Championship and Williams to finish 5th. That's my punt. Probably wrong. Scott looks amazed.
I'm interested. So you think that the Alpine's going to be good enough for Gasly to be the basically the top of the midfield in terms of drivers, but the Williams is going to be good enough for Sainz and Albon to steal in ahead. So you're not rating the Doohan Colapinto pairing that will form the second car at Alpine.
Well, I think the very fact that there's the question mark about will they change is going to be a bit disruptive. I was tempted not to go for Gasly, but I think he's performing very well. And what we saw at the end of last season,
he's doing really well.
So what I'm basically thinking is that, that the balance of the Williams lineup, which I think it'll be very close on performance ultimately. I think Williams will be pretty good this year. Will benefit them in terms of just drawing ahead of Alpine, and it's not necessarily the driver selection of those two, but just the whole situation. It doesn't bode enormously well, I have to say. Right, a question for you now, Mark, from Michael Cutler Methven. If you worked for Cadillac's F1 team, who would you propose for their first starter lineup? So, which 2 drivers are you signing?
I'd still be hoping to run with Colton Herta, or if he didn't fancy it, another genuinely quick American. I think it would add immensely to the value of the package and its effectiveness and profile to have a properly quick American driver in at least one of the cars. And I think I'd like Valtteri Bottas in the other car. Quick, experienced, easygoing, just what a fledgling team needs.
Next up, Scott, a question for you from Adam Smith. Given the expectation that Colton Herta will be a strong contender for one of the Cadillac seats, do you see a world where his success, should he in fact be successful, can kickstart a second Indy invasion, a la Villeneuve, Andretti, Montoya in the late 90s, with drivers like Alex Palou or Pato O'Ward? Before you answer that, I'll just flag up the facts. I recorded a F1 Extra members podcast with Jack Benyon, our IndyCar correspondent, talking about the various drivers who could be involved in F1 from IndyCar. I'm not sure exactly when that'll be out, but it'll be, if it's not out by the time you listen to this, it will be coming very, very soon. So keep a look out for that in your members feed. Scott, over to you.
The first thing that jumped out at me from Adam's question is Andretti's inclusion in that list with Villeneuve and Montoya. I understand it from where they came from point of view, making that transition from one series to the other, but obviously Andretti sticks out like a sore thumb, doesn't he, in terms of longevity and success, although Montoya's F1 career obviously famously wasn't massively long for reasons of great weirdness in the early 2000s. I'd be fascinated if this did happen, because it would be great for two reasons. One, it means that Herta has got into F1 and has done really well, and two, drivers like Palou and O'Ward, who had flashes on the conventional F1 ladder, but never necessarily the opportunity to really kind of stake their claim, could show what happens when a driver does do their refining out of the F1 spotlight. Palou has been fantastically consistent and impressive in IndyCar, and O'Ward is just, I have a bit of doubt over like the ultimate speed and performance there, but as a driver, in terms of car control and like how dynamic he is, it'd be fascinating to see him in Formula One. So I'd be all for it, but I'm not 100% sure it would actually trigger, even if Herta came in and did really well, I don't necessarily think it would trigger a load of teams looking over there. I just hope it would make teams more amenable to it.
And a reminder to listen to that members F1 Extra podcast with Jack Benyon for more on that topic. Right, question from Justin now that I'll take. Ed, you've managed to get the fastest lap point abolished. What's next in your crosshairs? Well, I don't necessarily have a list of things I want to demolish, but the fastest lap point was always stupid. I never liked it.
Rubbish signs at F1 races.
Well, poor signage is a big thing, but
Fox hunting.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole long list. If we're going to broaden it out beyond F1, there's a good old list, but probably, I mean, the fastest lap thing was such a clear-cut thing for me because it was so obviously flawed because of the way the races work, because of the way the tyres work. I'm pretty sure I wrote a column immediately articulating my argument for Autosport when they announced they were going to be doing it, saying, no, this is stupid. And I remember having that same thing when the elimination qualifying was introduced. I thought, well, that's stupid because it doesn't work with the way the tyres are. It's not going to have the desired effect. So probably the thing I'd most like to see, as I've ranted about before, is just making more of the sprint races. It's not about getting rid of the sprint races.
I knew that would be your answer.
It's about making more of them and just making them not just a little mini preview of the race. I think they can make them much more exciting and interesting for people, not by making them gimmicky, but it's a chance to kind of modify formats and that kind of thing, and maybe change some of the things that have been done in the past that have just been kind of dignified by time as the way things are done. So I'd like to see a bit more ambition with those sprint races. But for me, it's not quite as clear-cut as the fastest lap point because I just thought it was stupid. It just didn't work.
So it's in this case, it's more of this kind of thing rather than less of this kind of thing.
Yes, yeah. Let's make this kind of thing better rather than get rid of it. Let's put it that way.
Can I ask a supplementary question to Justin's, which is when the fastest lap point did get abolished, did you go ahead with arranging your open top bus parade?
Open top buses are quite difficult to hire. I have looked at that in the past for other reasons, but
sounds like a man that tried to get an open top bus for a parade and failed.
Tried I did out of interest explore the possibility for amusement's sake, but anyway, yeah, it's you've got to book it well in advance. Anyway, let's put it that way.
I like the idea that you'd have also done it at all of the sprint race, at all of the fastest lap venues. Sorry, from last year, you'd have just gone around all of the ridiculous fastest lap venues, like Ricardo's in Singapore, and ones like that. You specified the locations where they were particularly ridiculous.
Go around in the bus, beeping your horn, and yeah.
Ideally, I think I'd have kept it in reserve for any of those races where somebody who didn't finish in the top 10 got the fastest lap.
Yeah, exactly.
So the odd random Joe or Magnussen or the Singapore one, that'd be ideal for that. Anyway, yeah, nothing specific in my crosshairs. I'm sure I'll find something soon. I don't like to run around having things I want to destroy, but just sometimes there's
but
things
it just happens.
just sometimes there's things that just so don't make sense that you're like, no, get rid of it.
Yes.
Anyway, final question for you, Mark, from Ben Harwood. Do you think we will get more than 7 different race winners this year?
I think we'll do amazingly well to get 7, but yeah, it's possible, isn't it? It's well, what are we looking at? We're looking at if Max's car had broken down, then would have been an Alpine victory in Brazil last year. So you could get that sort of situation, which, if we're looking outside the top 4 teams, but also you could get all of those 2 drivers in each of the top 4 teams winning. That's not ridiculous. So it's Liam Lawson's probably got the tougher task in that, but Antonelli as well has got quite a task in doing that. So 7 would be amazing, and 4 teams winning like last year. But it's possible. Yes, it's feasible. We might get 8 or even 9,
maybe 10 or 11.
20.
No.
It's gone too silly now.
Stop.
But it shows what a difference a year makes, doesn't it? Because 12 months ago, you'd have been saying, is Max Verstappen going to win all 24 races? So things
But
changed.
less than 12 months ago, 3 or 4 races into the season. Obviously, you had the Australia interruption, but certainly at the start of last year, there was no reason to think that it would go any different.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of reasons to be excited to look forward to the season. Thanks very much to Scott and Mark for your answers. Thanks to everybody who submitted questions at the live show and came to the live show. And thanks to everybody who submits questions. Anyway, we really, really do appreciate it. We're inching towards February now, so we're going to start to get car launches turning up. And then before we know it, it'll be testing and then the season opening Australian Grand Prix. So stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.
Hey, sports podcast fans, did you know Discover is accepted at 99% of places that take credit cards nationwide? That's right, 99%. And every time you make a purchase with your card, you automatically earn cash back. That could mean earnings rewards when you buy those last-minute tickets, those overpriced concessions, and that takeout you ate at home after you bailed on meeting your buddies at the bar. Well, wherever you spend game day, remember, it pays to Discover. Based on the February 2024 Nielsen report, learn more at discover.com/creditcard.
Hello, I'm Ian McIntosh and I'm the host of the Daily Football Briefing. What is the Daily Football Briefing? It's a special 10-minute daily show designed to bring you up to speed with the most important stories from across the football world. Except on Monday mornings when it's 15 minutes and we try to cram in the results, standings and stories from the top 10 leagues on the planet. Or at least the top 10 leagues that I run on a Football Manager save. Follow this show today and you'll never miss another big story again, whether it's news that The Athletic has just broken. David Ornstein, what happened? News from outside the Premier League that other podcasts might ignore.
That is a difficult one to explain, so let's go bit by bit.
Or it's Champions League week and you just need someone to put it all into context.
It's made for a very useful away point in a difficult game in a difficult week.
Listen to the Daily Football Briefing in 2025. It's out every weekday wherever you get your podcasts.